This is part 1 in a series of 4 video lectures that will cover deductive arguments. In this first video lecture, we'll cover some basic formal logic. The first thing we will learn is the distinction between validity and soundness. And then we will learn what an inference pattern is. Let's get started. So just a quick recap on what we did last lecture. First, we learned that an argument is a set of statements or claims with one conclusion being supported by a set of premises. The conclusion of the argument is the main claim that the author is trying to convince you of, and the set of premises are those statements that are supposed to provide support for the main conclusion. And good arguments are those arguments that are well supported. Arguments where the premises do a good job at supporting the conclusion. Another way in which an argument can be good is if it is valid. Now, in philosophy, we actually use the word validity in a technical sense. In ordinary discourse, you might hear people say things like, "Oh, that's a valid point," or "that's a valid question." And that's fine. But in the context of the philosophy class, the word validity has a different and technical meaning. When writing a philosophy paper, you always want to aim to provide valid argument. So, what is a valid argument? Here's the answer. A valid argument is an argument where the truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. In other words, if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true as well. There can be no situation where the premises are true and yet the conclusion false. To put the matter differently, it's not possible for the premises are true and yet the conclusion false. So let's illustrate this point with the following example of a valid argument. Premise 1. If Joe is a bachelor, then Joe is unmarried. Premise 2. Joe is a bachelor. Conclusion, therefore, Joe is unmarried. Now ask yourself, can there be a situation where the premises are true and yet the conclusion false? Suppose that premise 1 and 2 are both true. Is it possible for the conclusion to be false? In this case, the answer is that no. It's not possible for premise 1 to be true and premise 2 to be true, and yet the conclusion false. So this argument is valid. It's one where the truth of the premises, if they are true, would guarantee the truth of the conclusion. It's not possible for the premises to be true and yet the conclusion false. Now let's take a look at another argument. Premise 1. If the moon is made of blue cheese, then the sun is made of seitan. Premise 2. The moon is made of blue cheese. Conclusion, therefore, the sun is made of seitan. So what do you guys think about this argument? Is this a valid argument? Why don't you pause the video and think about it for a moment? Does this argument fit the characterization of validity that I introduced earlier? Ready? Pause. Now unpause. So this argument is actually valid. It's an argument where if the premises are true, the conclusion necessarily follows. This is important because when it comes to assessing these arguments, we're asked to suppose that the premises are true, or that hypothetically imagine scenarios or situations where that's true. And then we can then ask, if they're true, would the conclusion have to be true as well? And in this case, yes, the conclusion does have to follow from the set of premises. Here's another example of a valid argument, one where the conclusion necessarily follows from the set of premises. Premise 1, if Fido is a dog, then Fido is an animal. Premise 2, Fido is a dog. Conclusion, therefore Fido is an animal. So this argument is also valid. The truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. It's not possible for the premises to be true and yet the conclusion false. Now compare the previous two arguments, the Fido argument and the moon argument. Both arguments are said to be valid, but I'm sure you're having the intuition that there's something off about the moon argument. It seems to us that the Fido argument is much stronger or somehow better. Why is that? What's the difference between those two arguments? Both are valid, and yet one seems to be better than the other. How do we explain this? Here's the explanation. The Fido argument is what we would call a sound argument, whereas the moon argument is not a sound argument, even though it's valid. So now we arrive at a very, very important distinction between validity and soundness. Recall, a valid argument is an argument where it's not possible for the premises to be true and their conclusion false. If the premises are true, then the conclusion is also true. That's a characterization of a valid argument. On the other hand, a sound argument is a valid argument with true premises. Let me repeat, a sound argument is a valid argument with true premises. So now let's compare the moon argument and the Fido argument together. Look at the Fido argument. The premises are true, right? If Fido is a dog, then it's an animal. That is a true statement. Fido is a dog. That is also a true statement. And since the Fido argument is valid, and it has true premises, then by the definition of what a sound argument is, we can conclude that the Fido argument is a sound argument. By contrast, when we look at the moon argument, we can immediately see that at least one of the premises in that argument is false. Namely, the moon is made of blue cheese. And that's clearly false. So this argument, the moon argument, even though it's valid, it is not sound. And it's not sound because not all the premises are true. At least one of them is false. So to recap, a valid argument is an argument where if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true as well. And a sound argument is one where the argument is valid and all of its premises are true. So that's the basic difference between validity and soundness. In this course, I'm going to teach you how to present valid arguments. Arguments where the truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. And I'm sorry for being very repetitive, but I want to drill in this point because it's very important. So now, you're probably wondering, how do I present valid arguments? Fortunately, the answer is very simple. In order to present a valid argument, you just have to make sure that your argument fits an inference pattern. And an inference pattern, you can think of it as a rule that tells you that a statement logically follows from others. In this course, I'm going to teach you 6 different inference patterns. In the next video lecture, I'm going to teach you modus ponens and modus tollens. The main takeaway of this video lesson is that you know the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument. Okay guys, so that's all I have for this video lecture. If you have any question about this material, please reach out to your TA or me with questions about validity and soundness. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.